Is it just me, or have movie villains become somewhat overpowered in recent years? I guess it makes sense that in a time where so many movies are part of bigger franchises, that in order to up the ante for the hero's next adventure, the villain would have to become more imposing in some way or another with each new installment. This can happen in physical terms, as we usually see in superhero movies, like Bane breaking the Batman to demonstrate his threatening strength compared to the Joker, or Thanos defeating the Hulk to clearly establish that this is going to be the endgame antagonist of the Infinity Saga. But beyond that, they can also become more intellectually superior. You know, it's that always one step ahead kind of villain, the one who planned to be caught, who was counting on the hero to make that unexpected move. And while I don't have an issue with this type of character, in fact some of them are all-time classics, I do feel like this general trend has somewhat overshadowed what might just be my personal favorite type of bad guy, and probably the most underrated one in today's cinematic landscape. And that's the villain who is actually one step behind the hero, who is pushed into a place of desperation from which they lash out frantically and aggressively. It's the villain whose true danger, whose true villainy, stems from them being cornered. This video is brought to you by Nebula, which will soon release its most ambitious project yet. A Black Mirror-like anthology series about unraveling human relationships. And perhaps the most exciting part, I wrote one of the episodes. But I'll talk more about it at the end.
You are most troublesome for a security guard.
Sorry, Hans, wrong guess. Would you like to go for double jeopardy where the scores can...
So what traits define the cornered villain? What makes them so special? Well, first off, they generally start off as active characters, meaning that when we meet them, they not only have a certain vision of what they want, but they're also already well on their way of getting it. In Casino Royale, Le Chiffre is a banker who's about to make a fortune by orchestrating a terrorist attack on a major airline. In Gladiator, Commodus kills his father and becomes Emperor of Rome.
I will give the people a vision of Rome and they'll love me for it.
And in Die Hard, the ever-so-cool Hans Gruber has a perfectly foolproof plan to steal $640 million in bearer bonds from an office building.
Telling you, you're just gonna have to kill me. Okay.
So far, that doesn't sound too different from any other villain. Though one thing that is noticeable here is that none of these aspirations involve the hero of the story. Like, there's no personal vendetta against the hero, there's no origin story that involves the hero's actions, nothing like the villains of Die Hard with a Vengeance, Oldboy, Black Panther, or Iron Man 2 for example. No, to the cornered villain, the hero might as well not exist at all. Whether they are believed to be dead or simply completely unknown to the villain, at this point, the hero is just completely off their radar. And this leads into one of the more distinctive characteristics of the cornered villain, which is that the first intervention of the hero, that is, Bond preventing the airline disaster, John McClane taking out the first bad guy, or Maximus making his first mark as a gladiator, also functions as a sort of inciting event for the villain that propels them on their own unexpected journey into unfamiliar territory. Not only are they left to scramble after an unexpected initial setback and forced to improvise as their original plan has been completely disrupted, but what also happens here is that for these villains, the stakes have suddenly become much higher. Sometimes they even go beyond the threat that the hero poses, like with Le Chiffre for example, who borrowed and, because of James Bond, subsequently lost a ton of money from some very bad people who are now coming for him.
Where is my money?
And it's this confrontation with all kinds of additional threats that force these villains beyond a point of no return, that lock them into a new trajectory, a new state of being, in which they go from being an active force in the story to an increasingly reactive one. In other words, this is the point where the cornered villain is pushed into the corner. Now, there is a subset of cornered villains who have story arcs that technically start out like this, Take for example the bad guy from the first Mission Impossible movie, whose initial plan is ruined by Ethan Hunt surviving an attack that should have killed him and who spends the rest of the story trying to contain this unanticipated loose end.
Ethan Hunt, darling, you remember him, don't you?
Or the one from The Fugitive, who thought he had gotten rid of Richard Kimball only to be unexpectedly confronted with him again as Kimball escapes from custody and starts investigating him.
Someone else must have been manipulating this. Someone with access.
But I consider these a subset because the identity of these villains is often kept from the hero and from the audience until much later in the story. And so most of their actions as the cornered villain, scrambling to save whatever is left of their original plan, happen off screen until we see the major reveal towards the end.
You almost got away with it, didn't you?
And you know, this is fine, this is not a criticism against those movies, especially considering how they have iconic secondary antagonists and a ton of other cool stuff going on. But it's also not the cornered villain in its purest form. Why? Because by placing them in the background for most of the story, you miss out on seeing directly exactly that which makes this type of villain so uniquely engaging and entertaining, which is their vulnerability. When discussing our most popular heroes, vulnerability is a quality that often comes up as something that makes them more relatable, that makes them more interesting.
Think, goddammit, think!
It's that which gives them an opportunity to show their character and to evolve over the course of the story. But the same is true when you apply this to villains.
The whole thing's like some crazy nightmare.
Even if we don't sympathize with them, their vulnerability does allow us to better empathize with them, to understand their motivations and their place in the story, and to simply get to know them as unique individuals.
Nice suit.
Because the thing about vulnerability is that it has a sort of mask-off quality. You know, when we first meet villains like Gruber, Commodus or Le Chiffre, we mostly see their public facade, we see their cultivated personas, how they want to present themselves to the outside world and to their enemies.
Welcome, Mr. Beach. Where's that Bond? I'm a little confused.
But when their back's against the wall, when they are cornered into an unexpected situation, that's when that mask starts to slip. That's when we see their true character emerging, see their insecurities, their fears, their weaknesses, which is not just an interesting reveal of character that contributes to these villains becoming more memorable in their own right, but it also forms an often accelerating catalyst for their connection to the hero.
We do not alter the plan.
And if he alters it...
For while I said the hero is initially not at all a part of the villain's world, they sure come to occupy it quickly and intensely. Not only because the hero already ruined the villain's day once in that initial intervention, but also especially so because they seem intent on doing so over and over.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
You know, when Le Chiffre hosts a poker game to win his money back, guess who shows up again to mess things up? When Commodus backs down to appease the crowds, guess who undermines him yet again?
And now they love Maximus for his mercy. So I can't just kill him or it makes me even more unmerciful.
And when Hans Gruber thought he was back on track, guess who now got invited to the party? What makes these interactions so exhilarating is not just that they advance the plot or reveal character. No, it's also just that they offer such cinematic ecstasy. I mean, this is what we go to the movies for, right? These are the moments that we remember.
I'm sorry. That left hand nearly killed me.
Even with the cornered villains who remain a little bit more in the background, who don't quite embody the archetype in its fullest, like Stansfield and Leon the Professional, they usually still manage to elevate their characters in these moments of frustration.
What do you mean, everyone?
It's a bit more understated, but I've also always loved this particular moment in Quantum of Solace where bad guy Dominic Green just kind of bumps into James Bond after he just crashed their party. You know, it's that brief look on his face here. It's amazing. Again, it's just pure cinematic joy, and it's meaningful to the story too. because it's these early victories from the hero over the villain that eventually push the villain even deeper into the corner, push them to their lowest point. And it's from this desperate place that the cornered villain also becomes genuinely dangerous.
The only question remains. Will you yield in time?
While a well-composed villain can definitely be a serious threat, one who has completely lost control, one who has grown desperate and erratic, that's something else. That's a villain whose inner chaos is bound to become outer mayhem. That's a villain who becomes truly unpredictable and unreasonable. That's one that you gotta look out for, especially when they've developed an obsessive grudge against you.
But you are so wrong!
It's another mask-off moment, really, because just as the unraveling of the public facade revealed the villain's weaknesses and vulnerabilities, the more passive traits that were hiding beneath the surface, at this stage we also get to witness the sort of opposite of that Jungian shadow, the active traits of malice, cruelty and vindictiveness that were also hiding beneath that mask, that were being somewhat contained by their cultivated personas, but which now have been set free as well, and unleashed upon the hero in an obsessive effort to hurt them where it hurts most.
Smile for me now, brother.
It renders their final confrontation strangely intimate, oftentimes even more so than with a villain who was out for revenge from the beginning, who already had a strong personal connection to the hero from the start. Because I think it's especially in those moments of retaliatory fury, aggressive eruptions and vicious strikes as the claws come out, that everything is laid bare, that the villain exposes the full depth of their character, exposes the root of their evil, as it were, and that we get to understand the truth about them, that deep down they were never magnanimous or clever or sophisticated, but merely hateful, violent and brutish. And more than just being a great story arc for a villain, in the end these intimate confrontations greatly serve the hero's journey too. For lest we forget, as fascinating as they can be, when all is said and done, these stories are not about the villain, they're about the hero. And from that perspective, what better antagonist could you offer them than one who so viscerally reacts to the hero's presence, who so clearly responds to their actions, and who ends up becoming their inverse mirror image in some way, an opposite journey that strengthens the final catharsis as one falls and another rises. Because of course it's the heroes too who are confronted with the same general obstacles and struggles that the cornered villain faces. They too come to suffer a loss of control, a loss of composure, and to also eventually reach their breaking points where everything they care about is at stake, where their entire sense of self comes crumbling down, and where the true nature of who they are is fully revealed. But unlike their villainous counterpart, naturally the hero's essence is one of virtue, one of positive transformation, that ultimately allows them to reconnect, to let go. And, I mean, I know it gets a bit more complicated for James Bond in the final act, but after facing off with Le Chiffre, he sure does come out ready to change his entire life.
Whatever I am, I'm yours.
And so, in conclusion, the cornered villain is not just a compelling type of antagonist in its own right, with lots of potential for character building and memorable moments. It's also an undeniably powerful one to push a hero to its limits and intensify the story at large. And in a time that seems to increasingly lean towards galaxy-brained evil masterminds and unstoppable forces of destruction, what probably fascinates me the most about the cornered villain is that they achieve all this precisely because they are not untouchable, because they are vulnerable and fallible. Unlike so many other villains that often feel like they're mainly designed to impress the audience, the cornered villain, by contrast, is allowed to be more human, to be emotionally complex, fragile, and unpredictable. It's what makes them so compelling, it's what makes them so dangerous, and to me, it's what makes them unforgettable. Okay, so the show is called Subliminal. It is by far the biggest project Nebula has ever undertaken. They have an Oscar-winning producer on board, a ton of other talent, and for some reason, me. My episode is called Noise Complaint, which is about a seemingly blissful woman who moves into a new apartment where a strange noise from the neighbors triggers an inner chaos within her that goes on to disrupt the entire building. You know, I wanted it to be something fun, something that has a very simple premise on the surface, but which also has all these deeper layers of meaning that add a psychological and philosophical complexity to it that will hopefully provoke you to keep thinking about it as the credits roll. Anyways, if you're not on Nebula yet, now is definitely the time, because if you sign up using my personal link, you'll get a 40% discount on a yearly subscription. That means you're basically getting 5 months for free, which is more than enough time to catch the release of Subliminal later this year. Signing up through my link also means that you're directly supporting my work, as a part of your contribution goes straight to me. So to everyone who's already subscribed, thank you so much. I really appreciate the support. If this is your first time hearing about Nebula, it's basically a streaming platform for independent creators like myself. You can watch all of our videos there without ads and sponsors, get instant access to a wealth of exclusive videos that aren't available anywhere else, and enjoy the growing catalog of Nebula originals, which will soon include Subliminal. So again, if you want to become part of the club, be sure to do so by using my personal link, that's nebula.tv/LSOO, to get a 40% discount.